I completely disregarded all criticisms for Nintendo and I bought myself a Nintendo Switch 2. Initially, I watched the trailer for the Switch 2 and I told myself, I don't need this. I really don't need this. I already have a Switch OLED and I pretty much just use that for Animal Crossing exclusively. And if you know Animal Crossing, you know that's not exactly a very difficult to run game. But I caved. What can I say? I'm a sucker for nice things. My partner's father pre-ordered 2 of them for some reason. And when the second one came, he offered it to me. And I don't know, I felt the need to buy one. So I bought one off him. I didn't buy it directly from Nintendo, I didn't get it on pre-order day, but I basically did because I got it like 2 days afterwards and it was from pre-order. So this is less of a review of the Switch 2 because I'm not a reviewer and I don't want to get into the shenanigans of everything that comes with being a reviewer. This is more of just a video of how I'm liking it, how I'm using it, how I'm feeling with it after a month of use. Again, I'm not a professional reviewer. I'm an average Joe who happened to pick one up. So I'll be covering what I liked, what I didn't like, how I feel overall, if I recommend it, who knows. Stay tuned to the end and find out. I want to get started with what I actually liked about the console, and to be fair, coming from someone who played the shit out of their original Switch, I'm talking like multiple hundred hours in multiple games, there is quite a lot to like. It's not all just a big negative train, so I'll get that started with so we can feel good about the console to begin with, shall we? I think firstly, the biggest upgrade that is the most noticeable as soon as you get into it is the performance of the thing. It is just such a huge difference in some of the titles and it genuinely changes the experience of some games, like entirely. I'm going to be real, I wasn't all that excited for Mario Kart World. I don't know, I really like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but for a console launching, I don't think Mario Kart is the play for me. It doesn't entice me. So what I did when I got my Switch 2 was immediately install Breath of the Wild Switch 2 edition, and I played that. It's kind of a surreal feeling, I think, because my first game on the original Switch, as I'm sure many other people's were, was Breath of the Wild, and that is one of my favourite games of all time. So 7 years later is a surreal feeling, especially because this is the new generation of console. I mean, anybody who played that game in 2017, even back then, knew that the game kind of ran like Dookie on the Switch, let's be real. It was just not powerful enough to run it, even at launch. There was constant frame dips. Don't even get me started on Korok Forest. I think overall it just ran like 25 FPS on average, which is still playable. Like, it was perfectly fine at the time, but it wasn't ideal. It wasn't what we wanted, it wasn't what we needed. And the Switch 2 gives me what I need. I mean, the Switch 2 edition runs at a crisp 60 FPS the whole time. It makes such a huge difference in the feel of the game. It's kind of hard to put into words, but it just feels like how the game should have been when it came out, even back in 2017. The overall graphic capabilities of this console can't be overlooked. I haven't played some of the more demanding games like Cyberpunk on the Switch. I haven't tested them out that really push the limits of the console's power, but I have seen videos and I've seen people play them, and it seems to handle even 4K gaming when docked. And being able to say that a Switch can do that is kind of baffling to say out loud in this day and age. So being able to say that a Nintendo Switch is able to output 4K gaming is wow. Unfortunately, not all games get performance buffs. I'll come back to that later, but that is just something to note. I will say the ergonomics of the thing was definitely improved. The console itself is way bigger, and for someone like myself with fairly large hands, it does make a big difference in terms of how long I can play in like handheld mode, which I have been doing a lot of lately. The new Joy-Con 2s feel great as opposed to the originals. The sticks are just so nice to move. It really makes the whole overall handheld experience so much more enjoyable compared to the original Switch, just because on my original Joy-Cons I had to have those, I don't know what they call them, that like they add extra height to the joysticks just so they're more comfortable to use, but I really don't feel like I need them on the Switch 2s, and it's just it's a quality of life improvement more than anything, but it makes such a big difference when you're playing it in handheld mode most of the time. I mean, it's not pro controller level or anything if I'm docked I'm going to be using a Pro Controller over the Joy-Cons. Like, it doesn't matter if it's the Switch 1 or 2, that experience can't really be matched by a Pro Controller, but it is definitely a much needed step up. This handheld experience is definitely one of the most comfortable I've ever had, and that includes like all of the DS family, which I would consider the most comfortable handhelds ever. To be honest, I think for me personally, this is probably a hot take, but I think it's more comfortable than the Steam Deck, because the Steam Deck is such a bulky piece of tech. Kind of makes it unwieldy sometimes. I can't really explain it because it's heavy, but it's also not because it's stretched out. Whereas the Switch 2 is a lot heavier than the Switch, but that size increase also applies, and it kind of creates this weird divide where some people are going to prefer the Steam Deck because of the ergonomics and the grips on the back, and that is objectively a better design. But the Switch 2, for me anyway, I think it's more comfortable. That's just something I've noticed though, and I think a lot of people would disagree with me, but that is what I have noticed. The actual material of the console is really nice. They changed the plastic to like a matte kind of plastic. It's kind of soft to the touch, and it's really nice. It's a very big improvement over the original Switch, which was just a hard plastic, although I am a little concerned on the survivability and the lifespan of that material, because I have heard and experienced in the past with things like the MX Master 3, which use a similar material. Grease and sweat leave marks on the actual machine, and we'll see if people experience like staining, I guess would be the word for it, but I mean, it's too early to say. So honestly, I think that's mainly most of the positives that I have to say. It's mainly just the performance and the comfort levels of the actual Switch compared to the original is so much better. You know, it's a small little list of things that are improved. But honestly, when you're using the handheld, those two things are probably the most important things in a gaming experience, right? It's the performance and the comfort. And both of those things were heavily improved upon. So honestly, using this console over an original Switch is night and day, and it's definitely more comfortable. But I'll get onto the negatives because it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Firstly, I want to talk about just Nintendo. What are you doing, man? 75 fucking pounds for a AAA game. 75 pounds. One of the 7 deadly sins is greed, and this just checks every single box, man. In what world do I have the lack of self-respect to spend £75 of my hard-earned money on what? Mario Kart? Mario Kart. You want me to spend £75 on Mario Kart?
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?
Are you having a laugh? I mean, luckily I got the Mario Kart bundle, which in the UK was £429 as opposed to the £395 for the base model. So technically I paid like £35 for it, which is honestly a steal. I mean, I think Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was £30 nowadays anyway, so it's about the same. But without the bundle, hell nah, bro. I'm not even mad at the console being 400. Like, honestly, like, the PS5 was 400. I mean, I bought one recently. I know I'm late to the party, but that cost me almost 400 pre-owned. The Steam Deck OLED was, what, 479? I think, which is even more than the Switch 2, and that doesn't come with any games. The console I'm not mad about. $395 for the console that's fine. But £75 for games. Mario Kart 8 is worth £30 on Amazon right now, brand new. So what exactly makes Mario Kart World worth £40 more than that? The answer is nothing. Nothing is worth £40 more than that. There is no excuse for the price increase other than just corporate greed. That's all it is. It's corporate greed. And I am vowing not to bow to these prices because I know damn well that I can have incredible gaming experiences for way less money than that. On the upcoming games that Nintendo release, there's a good chance I'm probably just not going to play them because of how much they cost. Like, for example, I know the game is, 7 years old by now, but I recently picked up and played God of War 2018. For my PlayStation 5. I bought that pre-owned for £8, and visually it demolishes anything that's been released on the Switch ever, even the new Switch 2 games.
Take a look. This is the last known bridge to Jotunheim in all the realms.
It runs perfect. It was an incredible story. One of the best games I've ever played. For £8. Not £75 for Mario Kart, Nintendo. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, I would love to play Cyberpunk 2077 on my Switch 2 and take it about on the go with me. But how can I justify spending £70 on the release when I can buy the exact same game on my PlayStation 5 for 30? Like, it just, you can't justify the price increase. It just doesn't make any sense. And it just sets a really awful example for the industry to follow. Nintendo are going to get away with it. They are going to get away with it, whether we like it or not, because the sheeps out there will pay the prices and they will buy the games at full price no matter what. Nintendo will see that it works. They'll continue doing it. Sony and Microsoft will probably join in because they see that that works too. GTA is probably going to be like £100. It's not a good path that the industry is going down, and I just hate Nintendo have done this because it just adds to the problem. It is really like when Apple released the original iPhone 10 for £1,000, and at that time that was unheard of and nobody ever done that before. And now look at it. Every single flagship phone is well over £1,000, and they just get away with it because they know that people will pay it. And that's exactly what's going on, and that's exactly what's going to happen in the gaming industry too. And it's sad. It is. I also hate keycards and their concept. Like, they aren't as bad as code in the boxes because I understand that you can resell the keycards. I guess it's still some sort of physical media. But the fact that you have to have an internet connection to play a physical media that you purchased in a box, put in your Switch, only to then download the whole game, just seems completely pointless to me. I wouldn't even be mad if the huge games required the keycard to be used, if it physically did not fit on the card. But a majority of them are just indie games that have no need to be digital only. They just are, for whatever reason. In 25, 30 years, when the Switch store goes down, you're just not going to be able to download those games again. You own the card, you have the physical media, but you just won't be able to play your game if you deleted it for whatever reason. Just gone, forever. Actually, I think the screen is something that I want to bring up as well. Honestly, I'm okay with the screen. I think it looks pretty good. It's definitely a massive improvement over the original Switch, the 6.2 inch, however, whatever it was, LCD from 2017. But I myself am upgrading from a Switch OLED, and honestly, it's not an upgrade. Even the best LCD screen will not beat an OLED. There's no way around that. The colors will never be the same. The vibrancy will never be the same. It just can't really be matched. From a corporate perspective, I understand why they did it, because they're going to make a Switch 2 OLED or like a Switch 2 Lite in like a couple years, and everyone's going to throw more money at them to buy the new console, and people who already have this console will still buy the OLED. But it's just like, you already made a Switch OLED. You have the technology to do that. If it wasn't for the performance and the comfortability, I would still be using my Switch OLED now. I don't know. It's a bit of the kick in the teeth, because when you're upgrading to a new console, you expect everything to be an upgrade. So when you upgrade a handheld, which you're looking at the screen the entire time, you kind of expect to upgrade, not downgrade. My last major gripe of mine was the battery life of the console. In my tests, things like Breath of the Wild, for example, got about 2 hours of battery life, and it's very comparable to the original Switch that came out. So when the Switch in 2017 first released, that version also got about the same similar battery life. They re-released the Switch with a updated processor, and it greatly improved the battery life, and they also did this for the Switch OLED. But I guess because of the updated processing power and all that, it's gone back down to that original Switch 2017 number of battery life, which is, to be fair, for what it is, it's serviceable. If you're on the go for a couple hours, it will last you. But for me, who goes on aeroplanes maybe a couple times a year for maybe 3 or 4 hours in each of those journeys, that's not going to suffice for the whole journey, whereas my Switch OLED would have. That's just something that you have to keep in mind when you're using it on the go. It just won't maybe last as long as you would like, especially comparing to the later models of the Switch OLED, the Switch Lite. But to be fair, the battery life isn't horrible, and it's about comparable to the Steam Deck OLED. So, take that what you will. Okay, minor complaint time. Coming back to that whole software and performance kind of aspect. The fact that many Switch games did not get updates for the Switch 2 it's kind of disappointing, I guess, going from the Switch to the Switch 2 with some games that you definitely know it has the capability to run nicer, but they're just not going to receive an update and they just don't receive the buff of the Switch 2. I think a prime example for this would be Persona 5 Royal on the Switch that I'm playing through at the moment. On the original Switch, it doesn't look brilliant. It's kind of fuzzy. It runs at 720p, 30 frames or less. That's just because of what the Switch could handle when it was released. The Switch 2, I'm pretty sure, just emulates using the same kind of processing power that the original Switch does, so it runs exactly the same. It's quite disappointing switching from like Breath of the Wild Switch 2 edition, where it runs in a perfect 60 and you know it has that processing power, back to Persona, where even though you know that the models have a higher resolution version of them on things like the PlayStation 5, that just hasn't been implemented into that version because it isn't going to receive the Switch 2 update just because it's an older game, and like for example Atlas have their priorities set elsewhere. It's kind of just disappointing to see that some games won't receive the updates that you'd like them to get, so just take that in mind when you're buying a Switch 2 and you want to play older titles. Not all of them are going to run like how you would expect them to on a Switch 2. I think another thing that irks me that honestly really isn't that big a deal, this is just a minor nitpick, was the grip for the Joy-Con 2. That shitty piece of plastic they include in the box when you buy the console, just so you have a grip to hold it with when you don't have a Pro Controller. They made a new one for the Joy-Con 2. Honestly, I was one of those people who genuinely actually liked the original Joy-Con grip.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I thought it was quite comfortable. The actual grip in your palm was a rounded corner, and it just kind of sat comfortably like this in your hand. This one doesn't, because of how the Joy-Con 2's mechanisms work with the magnets sticking to the side and you have to pull them away. There has to be that leeway where you can actually pull the Joy-Cons away. So the front of the grip is just flat. And it's not bad to the point where it's uncomfortable. It's just not as enjoyable to use. And I found that when I have the Switch docked, quite a lot of the time, instead of using the Joy-Cons separately and putting them in the grip that came with it, I'll just pair my old Joy-Con 1s inside the grip and use it as a controller. I think for me, Joy-Con 2s work so much better as the standalone handheld controllers for the actual console itself, whereas if you put the Joy-Cons in the grips, the original Joy-Cons work better for me, in my opinion. But that is probably the most minor complaint you're ever going to hear out of anyone talking about the Switch 2. Also, circling back to the whole Pro Controller thing, why is it that only the new Pro Controller 2 and the new Joy-Cons wake it from sleep? It's just such a, I don't know, it's such a minor thing, but it seems so pointless to remove that feature. I still have my old Pro Controller here. I still have my original Pro Controller from, when is this, 2018, 2017, whenever Splatoon 2 came out. I've had this the whole time, and it works fine still. I'm not going to buy a new Pro Controller just because I can't wake the thing from sleep anymore. It's just so, it's so silly. But it's just like, now I gotta press the power button on the console itself to wake it up from sleep. Okay, you're just adding an extra 2 seconds onto my experience, and it's not that big a deal, but it really threw me off when I first bought it. Like, I had no idea that it wouldn't do that, and I kind of just assumed that if you synced the controller to the console, you could power it like you could on the old one. But no, you need the new Joy-Con 2s or the new Pro Controller 2 in order to wake it from sleep remotely. So, okay. I think the final thing that I'm going to complain about is mainly speculation more than anything. iFixit did a teardown of the Switch 2 and its Joy-Cons, and apparently the sticks are built in exactly the same way as the old ones. I'm hoping that Nintendo have addressed the Joy-Con drift issue and that it will not be prevalent enough to the point where it is a major issue as it was on the last one. If you owned an original Switch, it was less of an if and more of a when your Joy-Cons would get stick drift. I've experienced it on both sets of Joy-Cons I've owned, and I've luckily had them sent to Nintendo to be repaired for free, but that was only after they started offering that service to people who complained. And it just doesn't make sense for them to have not addressed the issue, because it's only going to create more issues for them in the future. I don't know. Well, time will tell if stick drift will be an issue with the Switch 2. I'm hoping that they have addressed it, but if they haven't, it's just going to be really disappointing, because there was so much opportunity and so much time to develop a new system that would work. We'll have to wait and see. I have personally not experienced anything in the month that I've used it, but to be fair, my original Joy-Cons didn't drift for a couple years after I bought them, so we'll have to see. Another massive point that people point out is just the existence of the Steam Deck in general, and to be honest, I think it's really hard to compare the two. I would say that if you're an average consumer who isn't into technology, you don't know how to tinker with things, you're not interested in tinkering things, like emulation is not even on your mind, you just want to come back from work, turn on your TV and play some games, then sure, if you have the money, get a Switch 2. Honestly, if the performance isn't a priority for you, I would honestly get a Switch 1. You can get them for dirt cheap now because everyone's selling theirs to get the Switch 2. I've seen people sell their Switch Lites, which have the same performance as Switch OLEDs or Switch 1s, for less than £100 on eBay. Fully working, like they were, but for less than a quarter of the price of the Switch 2. Which, for me, if you're just looking to play some games at a budget, is a no-brainer. Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Odyssey, the list goes on in terms of AAA experiences you can have that are still on the original Switch. Yes, that they will run better on the Switch 2. For a lot of people, I can hardly see how that's worth the extra £300 to then upgrade to the Switch 2. I think ultimately, if you have the money and you're comfortable paying the premium of the Switch 2, I would recommend the Switch 2 over the original Switch, because for the experiences like Breath of the Wild, it just is such a game changer that it really does impact the way that you play the game. But obviously, if you don't have the money, that's perfectly fine, and no one's going to judge you for buying a Switch 1. If you are someone who is interested in PC gaming, modding, learning about Linux, that kind of thing, on the more technical side of things, like myself, for example, and you're only going to buy one console, you're only going to buy one handheld, and that's the only thing you're going to use the whole time, buy a Steam Deck, honestly. Just buy a Steam Deck. At the end of the day, and don't tell anyone I told you this, there are ways to play Switch games on the Steam Deck, and whilst it's not as convenient and not as seamless, you can still dock a Steam Deck to a TV and use it with a controller or something along those lines. So, you know, they're pretty similarly priced. The Steam Deck OLED has a better screen, better performance. The customizability is just night and day for the two, and overall with the price of the games, you'd probably be spending less money in the long run, because Steam constantly have sales on games, whereas Nintendo never put their games on sale and are now charging £75 for them. I think overall the month that I have used the Switch has been enjoyable. The original Switch meant a lot to me. It was a console that I needed when I bought it, because I was at a time where I needed something to escape, and the Switch provided that. And it was a very magical experience, and I really appreciate the time that I had with the Switch. So the Switch 2 still kind of carries on that for me, because I have a lot of personal attachment to Nintendo, but recently the criticisms that have been received towards Nintendo are definitely warranted. It's got to the point where it's kind of hard to recommend the Switch 2 for someone who is looking to buy it, as opposed to other options like an original Switch or a Steam Deck. Because I understand that people aren't like me. I'm someone who puts a lot of money and effort into video game consoles, and I have many of them. Like, I have 7 DSs, I have 2 Switches, a Steam Deck, I have a PS5, I have a lot of consoles. And I understand that most people just have the one console that they use into the ground, and that's where they get their gaming experience from. When it comes to picking that singular console experience, as I've said before, I think it really just depends on the kind of person you are. I've really enjoyed the Steam Deck so far, and I hope that they port more games to the Switch 2, and I'm looking forward to playing a lot of indie games on it too. But I think that there are definitely some valid criticisms to be had about the console, and we'll have to wait and see in the long run to see how the issues persist and how Nintendo handles the criticism. But, you know, that's just my opinion. Thank you for making it this far into the video. I'd love to hear what you think about the Switch 2 in the comments, and if you have any criticism of the Switch 2, please let me know. But thank you for listening to me ramble. That's pretty much all I've got to say, and I will see you later.